Alhamdulillah wa salatu wassalamu ala Rasulillahi sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Allahu Rabbu Muhammadin sallallahu alayhi wa sallama. Nahnu ibadu Muhammadin sallallahu alayhi wa sallama. Honorable and respectable elders, brothers and sisters, students of knowledge, to each and every one of you, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I hope and pray each and every one of you are in the best state of Iman and health. From the outset, I want to take this opportunity to express my gratitude to Brother Hassanuddin and his entire team for arranging and facilitating this much needed bayan lecture just before the blessed month of Ramadan Kareem. Inshallah Azza wa Jal, I don't intend to take too much of your time. As you can see, I've gone through the effort of preparing a PowerPoint for this afternoon's brief talk. There are going to be two elements and aspects to our discussions this afternoon. The first is exploring the outer dimensions of fasting, the do's and don'ts basically. And then inshallah Azza wa Jal, towards the end we will explore the inner dimensions, the spiritual aspect of fasting and the virtues of Ramadan. So without any further delay, we'll start with the definition of fasting. Definition of fasting. Literally and linguistically, the word fasting in Arabic means to refrain or to abstain. What are we refraining and abstaining from? It is essentially speaking, eating, drinking, or any other action like this. Istilahan, linguistically and technically, should I say, technically the legal definition of fasting is to abstain from true dawn, what is Fajr Sadiq, until sunset, dusk, and from allowing anything to enter into the stomach through either the nose, the mouth, or any cavity in the body, whether intentionally or unintentionally. In addition to this technical definition, legal definition, it also encompasses abstaining from sexual gratification, and one must have the intention of being in the state of fasting. This is a brief understanding of the literal as well as technical definition of fasting. The rulings of Ramadan and the conditions that render it obligatory. So it becomes obligatory for fard to perform the fast of Ramadan, as well as obligating one to make up any unperformed fast of previous Ramadans when an individual meets the following four conditions. So a person must be a Muslim. Fasting is not prescribed, nor is it obligatory upon a non-Muslim. A person must be of sound health. So, not just physical sound health, but also mental sound health as well. So a person who is insane, who has lost their consciousness, is not required to fast when the fasting of Ramadan becomes obligatory. Further to this, number three, that person has to have reached adulthood. Ramadan is not obligatory upon a child. So they must have entered into bulugh, puberty. That varies, of course, depending on the development of a person. Usually for a boy, it's around the age of 10. And for a girl, it's usually a year or two later. And the fourth condition is that person who is fasting must have knowledge of Ramadan being fard. So this is a condition which is exclusive for those who embrace Islam in Darul Harb. Darul Harb is a non-Muslim land where Muslims reside and live. So of course the United Kingdom falls into that discussion. So here it is imperative that one has the knowledge that Ramadan is fard before Ramadan becomes obligatory. So these are four conditions. If these four conditions are met, then that person is obliged to keep the fast of Ramadan. For failure to do so leads to severe consequence. And we find this a growing trend. Every year, a lot of youngsters, without stereotyping, those who go to colleges and universities in particular, and even secondary schools, they will make a number of reasons in order to avoid fasting. Basti sirai darda, kal roza nahi rakhna. Pete mador paide ji, kal roza nahi rakhna. I've got exams tomorrow, I need to focus on my exams. Allah Akbar. If a person intentionally misses a fast of Ramadan, without an excuse, that even if that person was to fast an entire lifetime, they will not be able to make up that one fast that they missed intentionally. Again, like I said, this is a growing trend, a growing concern, especially amongst the youngsters of the third and fourth generation of Muslims in this country, regardless of what background you're from. Further to this, there are more conditions, shara'id, that validate the fasting of Ramadan. For example, one has to make the intention to fast. وَبِصَوْمِ غَدٍ نَوَيْتُ مِنْ شَهْرِ رَمَضَانِ. Though once the month of Ramadan enters, normally that intention is always there. And intention, of course, is related to the state of the heart. It's related to the abode of the heart. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. And of course, intentions are the foundations of our actions. We must make intention that we are fasting in the month of Ramadan. Further to this, one must be free from anything that is contrary to fasting. So for women, for example, for women, they must be free from being in a state of junub, an impurity. So the makhsus ayyam, specific days, 7 to 10 days in the month, or the days of nifas, postnatal bleeding, they must be free from these days in order for them to fast. And number 3, one is free from all things that invalidate the fast. So, being free from the state of janaba is not a condition for fasting, should I say. So if somebody was to have conjugal relations in the hours that fasting is not prescribed, yani after iftar and before sahri, and one wasn't to do ghusl, that doesn't mean because they're in the state of junub, in the state of major ritual impurity, that they do not keep their fast. They do, and they can perform their ghusl after, certainly before fajr, because fajr is obligatory one. Okay, so that's something which is again very clear here towards the bottom of this slide. Conditions are very important to understand. So just like the prayer has preconditions, 6 preconditions before the prayer. And I won't test you, we've only got a handful of you here. You know, if I start testing you, the 3, 4, 5 of you that are here, you might start walking out one by one. So don't worry, I'm not going to test you on the 6 preconditions of the prayer. Similarly, you have preconditions of entering into the state of ihram, or before doing umrah and hajj. So it's something similar here as well. Fasting, of course, is one of the pillars of Islam, and it has conditions that make it valid. Okay. Okay. Very quickly, cautious of the time, there are different types of fast. Different types of fast. So this goes into al-ahkam al-shari'iyya. There are 5 types of ahkam, yani fard, wajib, sunnah muakkada, sunnah ghair muakkada, and mustahab. So the types of fast go into one of these ahkam al-shari'iyya. So fard, of course, it is obligatory to fast during the month of Ramadan. During the month of Ramadan. And atoning for and fulfilling any fast that were missed or invalidated during previous Ramadans. Expiation fast, kafara, and nazar fast, so on and so forth. These all fall into the category of fard. Wajib would be atoning for and fulfilling any fast that you have promised to do something. For example, if I pass my driving, I will keep 3 consecutive fasts. Yes? So maybe for some of you might need to keep more fasts. It's getting more and more harder every year, I think, to pass your driving. I passed, I think, about 19 years ago. So I did well back then. So, for example, you keep this promise, you make this promise, and then you have to fulfill that promise. Keeping them fast will be wajib. It's like the sunnah, nafal, and expiation fast that were invalidated. Sunnah fasts, you have the 9th of Dhul Hijjah, the day of Arafah, and this is of course based upon the sighting of the moon in your locality, and not necessarily following those people who assume that they are custodians of the religion. Those who know. And the 10th of Muharram, yes, the day of Ashura. And if you are going to fast on the day of Ashura, then you are also required to fast either on the 9th and or on the 11th, yani 2 consecutive days. And before fasting was made obligatory, yeah, before fasting was made obligatory, can anyone tell me in which year after the Hijrah was fasting made obligatory? Ooh, that's Hajj. Anyone? Second year after Hijrah. 2 pillars of Islam were made obligatory in the second year after Hijrah. Fasting as well as zakat. Okay? So Hajj, as is already alluded to, in the 9th year after Hijrah, zakat and fasting were made obligatory in the second year after Hijrah. Prior to that, the fast of Ashura, and this was obligatory. This then became abrogated when the fasting of Ramadan became obligatory. Does that make sense? So before the fasting of Ramadan became obligatory, the Sahaba and the Prophet ﷺ would keep the fast of Ashura. And there is obviously a lot more to it in regards to the fast of Ashura. And then mustahabbat, recommended fasts, the 13th, 14th and the 15th of every Islamic month, what we refer to as the full white moon days, every Monday and Thursday of each week. Yes, in some books of fiqh you will see that this is upgraded to sunnah ghair muakkada, but nevertheless, the 6 days during the Islamic month of Shawwal, and any other day that has been mentioned by the Prophet ﷺ, and one which promises reward from the sunnah, such as the fasting of the Prophet Dawud al-Islam. The Prophet Dawud al-Islam will fast one day, miss a day, fast the 3rd day, miss a day, fast the 5th day, so on and so forth. So these fasts would fall into the 4th type here, which is mustahab, recommended. If you do it, you get reward, but if you don't do it, you won't get punished. Yes, this is what we refer to as mustahab, or what you will be more familiar with the term nafal, nawafil. So this usually is the case for many acts of worship, like we've just observed the night of Shab-e Bara'ah, Laylatul Bara'ah. And I'm assuming that many of you are active on social media. You would have seen and heard many preachers and speakers from different backgrounds on TikTok and Instagram and social media, throwing their 2 pence worth in regarding the validity and whether it is necessary for us to spend the night of the 15th of Sha'ban in worship. But our position is clear that it is mustahab. So why the debate and why the blowing things out of proportion upon something which we're not saying it is fard, we're not saying it is wajib. Fard is your Isha Salah on the night of the 15th. Fard is your Fajr Salah the following morning. And I'm of the position, and I know the recording is happening, or maybe I'm getting a bit carried away. I'm of the position that if you're not going to read your Isha at night and you're not going to read your Fajr in the morning, it doesn't matter if you stay up all night worshipping Allah Almighty, it will be of no benefit. Because the level of Nafal, as you can see, is number 5 usually on the list, or 4 in this discussion. Nafal, Mustahabbat, Mandub, acts of worship are number 5. Whereas Faraid and Wajibat, they are first and second on the list of the types of worship. So we have to be clear when it comes to these type of discussions. Again, cautious of the time, it is already 1:30, believe it or not. What does not invalidate and what does invalidate the fast? So this discussion here does require a bit of time, in all honesty. And of course you can read this discussion in the books of fiqh. You can read this discussion in the books of fiqh. But very quickly, actions that do not invalidate the fast, there are 14 in total. So there are certain things, certain actions, certain af'al and a'mal, should I say, which do not invalidate the fast. We're going to go through them. Then there are those actions, af'al and a'mal, which do invalidate the fast. And if there are actions which invalidate the fast, then they fall into one of 2 categories. Either you are required to make up that fast, atonement of the fast, as well as giving a compensation for the violation. And you can see here there's 13 things that fall into that first category. As for those actions that if you're guilty of doing, it invalidates the fast, but you're only required to atone for the fast that you made. Mr. should I say, you make the fast up. Make the fast up. And that list is quite extensive, 34 things in total. So sometimes we can get bogged down with the do's and the don'ts. But essentially, we generally know what we should stay away from and what is permissible and allowed. There is this discussion regarding expiation. If a person violates any fast during the month of Ramadan with such an action that terminates the fast, as well as requiring expiation to compensate for the infringement of the fast, then this person becomes liable for expiation, kafara. So the penalty for violating a fast of Ramadan is to free a healthy slave who is physically and mentally sound, be it male or female. So of course, freeing a slave is technically not possible, though we're all slaves of the system, but that's a different type of discussion before we have somebody else walking out. I don't like touching people's nerves. But nevertheless, if you can't find a slave to free, and you're unable to free a slave, then you must fast for 2 consecutive months. And you might say that sounds a bit harsh, but again, these deterrents are put in place in order for you to avoid going down that route of making a mockery of fasting in the month of Ramadan or general fasting. You have to adhere to the rules that Allah Almighty and the Sharia have stipulated. Yes? And them 2 consecutive months must be without interruption. So for example, you want to fast, let's say, 57, 58 days. You get to the 59th day, you can't fast because you've got a headache or you're not able to physically fast. Then if you're not able to fast on the 59th day, then you'll have to start again. So the deen is not a joke, nor should we make a mockery of it. And again, we see this quite commonly happening, not just in Ramadan, but outside of Ramadan as well. People who are not qualified to discuss matters of the deen, again, throwing their 2 pence worth in. But what qualification do you have? Well, I've heard a few speeches on YouTube, and I've sat with 1 or 2 scholars for a few weeks, but that doesn't really qualify you to discuss matters of the deen. We have to know what our position is. And if a person is unable to fast for 2 consecutive months, based upon reasonable circumstances, then they must carry out one of the following. Okay, this is expiation, you have to understand this. If you understand this, then we'll be able to avoid those things that will break the fast, which will require that expiation. So what is it that you are required to do? You provide 2 meals for the same 64 people. Or you provide 1 poor person with 2 meals a day for 60 days. Or you present half a measure of wheat or a similar food grain, or its monetary value to 64 people, and the rest of it's there as well, without going into too much of the detail. When one reads the discussion regarding expiation and kafara, then you think, oh, maybe I shouldn't go down that route of just taking these matters lightly. Dislike actions during fasting, to taste something without a reason. Yes, dislike, and this discussion hasn't just been taken out of, plucked out of thin air. Of course, it's substantiated from the books of fiqh. So if you are going to source it as a reference, that there was a Maulvi Sahib that came a couple of weeks ago, i.e. in Ramadan, circumstantial, and he said, look, this is dislike, then I can give you this much guarantee. In fact, I'll send you the PDF as well. It's called The Essentials of Fasting by Essential Islam. A lot of this is taken from there. I know the books of fiqh as well. So very quickly, to taste something without a reason, chewing something without a reason, petting, where a person is unsure, and you can read the rest yourself. Number 4, gathering saliva in one's mouth, and this is common. Yes? I don't know about you guys, but when we were younger, it was a case of just standing there for a couple of minutes and then, but this is something which is disliked. We're not saying it's makruh tahrimi, close to haram, but it's something that said it should be avoided. And performing any act which is believed to weaken one from fasting. So hijama generally is allowed, but if you feel that by doing hijama you're going to get weaker and you're going to struggle to keep the rest of the fast, then you should avoid this. Hijama meaning cooking. Yes? So these are 5 things which are generally disliked. We're not saying they're haram, we're not saying it invalidates the fast. But you should avoid them. You should avoid them. Okay. What is not disliked, this is something, of course, which is important for us to know. And we can see here 9 things which are not disliked during fasting. Petting between a husband and wife, when a person is sure that it won't lead to any outcome from that. Number 2, rubbing oil or lotion on the moustache. Number 3, the application of kohol surma. Number 4, we've already alluded to, is cooking. Number 5, bloodletting. Number 6, using a miswak at the start or the end of the day when it is moist or wet. Now this is something worth clarifying. You find sometimes miswaks with flavors in them, mint flavor for example, or other type of flavoring. And again, people read these certain rulings on Google, that oh gee, you can use toothpaste as well and you can use miswak. It's not permissible, it's not allowed. You should not brush your teeth whilst fasting. Many reasons for not doing this. One reason is what? The fragrance that comes from and the odor that comes from the mouth of the person who is fasting is more beloved to Allah Almighty than any perfume or fragrance of the dunya. And you want to replace that with Aquafresh or Colgate? Why? Because you're going to uni or to work? It doesn't make sense. Somebody might say, I've read it on Google. Again, validate the sources. Where are you taking the information from? So, scented miswaks, using toothpaste or toothbrush with toothpaste, these things should be avoided. But general dry miswak or what's being made wet or moist, as we just heard and as we are reading it, is not disliked. Having a shower or a bath, again, avoiding gargling or taking water into the soft part of the nose. That should be the case either when doing the ghusl and or when making ablution. Yes, don't start gargling and say, oh, what's going on here? You're supposed to be fasting. Yeah, but I'm gargling. And then there's a risk of the water going past your throat line. Again, we've got to use a bit of common sense. So what doesn't work when fasting, you should avoid. So having a shower or bathing is generally fine. And dressing in wet clothes in order to cool yourself down is also considered to be fine. Also considered to be fine. So again, good to know limits and boundaries and perimeters which have been set. We should adhere to such things. Which sets us up nicely for the last discussion here in terms of the outer dimension. So it links in nicely with the inner dimension of fasting, and that is i'tikaf. I'tikaf is spiritual seclusion. It means to seclude oneself or to remain in isolation. I'tikaf is to enter the masjid with the intention that one will remain there in seclusion for the sole purpose of worshipping Allah Almighty Jalla wa Ala. This spiritual retreat must be carried out in a masjid where the 5 daily prayers are performed in congregation. I.e., this is for the men, for the brothers. For the sisters, it will be in a designated room in their home where they will normally pray their 5 daily prayers. Or a room which they will seclude from everyone else, i.e. a bedroom or a back room or something similar to this. As we can see here, during i'tikaf it is recommended that a person remains busy in worship and other beneficial actions such as praying and reciting the Quran, remembering Allah Almighty Jalla wa Ala and His Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, speaking only good and gaining beneficial knowledge. So you find some masajid, I'm from Bradford, that have a set program from Fajr Sadiq, again in the time of the Suhoor, all the way till Taraweeh, in classes and lectures and courses for them 10 days, and people become rejuvenated after spending that period of time in the masjid. It's a great opportunity to draw closer to your deen. So the attendance from the brother side, of course, is quite limited today. The sisters, you will have your own siblings, your brothers, or one day you'll have your own spouses. You should encourage them. It's like a detox, right? A 10-day detox where you disconnect from everything in the dunya and you connect with Allah Almighty. Nevertheless, what's the reward of this? The Prophet ﷺ said in a narration recorded in Bukhari, he himself ﷺ used to practice i'tikaf during the last 10 nights of Ramadan, and the Prophet ﷺ gave the instruction to seek out Laylatul Qadr during the last 10 days of Ramadan. So we assume, again, this is a cultural thing, whether you're from a Pakistani background, Indian or Bangladeshi, we assume and we place all of our eggs into one basket that the night of Laylatul Qadr is the 27th night. That's a misconception, and that would be wrong for you to assume. It could be any of the odd nights during the last 10 nights of Ramadan. 21st, 23rd, 25th, 27th, 29th. So the primary purpose of i'tikaf would be to seek out and search for the night of power. Laylatul Qadri khayrun min alfi shahr. That night which is better than 1,000 months. And then of course everything else that comes in addition to that. Okay. So again, we mentioned, should I say, back here, certain actions which do not invalidate, certain actions which require both atonement and kafara, and then just atonement. That list, again, I'll send to Hassanuddin. I'm assuming that there'll be some sort of WhatsApp group. For those who have the intention to come today, I'll give you the PowerPoint as well. There's no copyright on it, don't worry. It's something that you can share, and hopefully will benefit those who had the intention to come. I have, in the designated time that we've allocated for this session, 15 minutes which I think is more than sufficient time to cover the second element of our discussion. We'll take questions at the end. Inner dimension of fasting. This is often neglected, especially in the day and age that we live in, materialistic world, where many of us are caught up in consumerism and capitalism. And we lose the spiritual dimension of our acts of worship. We're certainly seeing this now in Makkah al-Mukarramah and in Al-Madinah al-Munawwarah. Those who go for Umrah and Hajj, and again I'm not stereotyping, nor am I here to judge anyone, but we see that a lot of people are now more drawn towards the commercial aspect of the pilgrimage. The hotels that they stay in, and the facilities that are on offer in and around the vicinity of Makkah and Al-Madinah al-Munawwarah. And this obviously has led to a shift in the outlook of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and those who run the country as well. I don't think this is the time or the place to go into all of that. It's my first time at this university. I don't want it to be my last time. Yes, it could be that these cameras are working, not just Maulana Shamsuddin's camera at the back. Allah Almighty Jalla wa Ala says in the Quran, in Surah Al-Baqarah, the longest chapter in the Quran, 286 verses in Surah Al-Baqarah, the chapter of the cow, 40 rukus. Verse number 183, you know this verse, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, kutiba alaykumus siyamu kama, kutiba ala alladhina min qablikum, la'allakum tattaqun. And O people who believe, O believers, fasting has been made compulsory upon you, just as it was made compulsory upon those before you, so that you may attain taqwa. Girls, eyes are lifted. What must they be thinking? Seems quite. And yes, they are my daughters, before you think that Imam said, I'm going to go somebody else's daughters. Yes. So the practice of fasting was observed by many significant messengers and prophets. Which prophet did we mention a short while ago? Mashallah, at least someone's listening. Dawood alayhi salam. And many other messengers like this and prophets who would observe the fast. And it is considered to be much more than the act of simply abstaining from food and drink. So similarly, we mentioned the fast of Ashura. Who was the first person, by your own knowledge, to keep the fast of Ashura? Not the Prophet Ali. Sayyidina Ali is not a prophet, he's a Sahabi, but there was a prophet. I'll give you a clue, his name starts with an M. No, before our Prophet ﷺ. I alluded to it, Prophet Musa ﷺ. Yes? So when Allah Almighty protected and saved Musa ﷺ and his people from the tyranny and oppression of Fir'aun, to do shukr to Allah Almighty, Musa ﷺ and his people, they would fast on the 10th of Muharram. I'm just giving you some further examples here. So this is something which is not restricted just to our ummah, but to previous ummah as well. Fasting is one half of patience, nisful sabr, and patience is one half of faith, nisful iman. Thus fasting equates to 1/4 of iman. Expanding upon the 3 Arabic letters contained within the word for Sawm or fasting, Swad is for Siyana, Waw is for Wilaya, and Meem refers to Mudawana. Again, we can expand on these 3 words, but this just gives us one understanding of the inner dimension of fasting, which is that it is a gateway to taqwa. What is taqwa? It is God feeding us. It is God consciousness. So لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, Allah Almighty Jalla wa Ala says the ultimate purpose is for you to attain this consciousness of Allah Almighty. Knowing that Allah Almighty is always observant and aware of our deeds and our actions. This is taqwa. It can be explained in many different ways as well. Taqwa is mentioned in 239 verses in the Quran. The word taqwa itself or its derivatives. It is the best of provisions and the key to happiness and success in both worlds. And this notion is personified in the physical and spiritual state of the muttaqeen. through understanding taqwa, a person is able to build up this state of alertness where one is always at any given moment ready to fulfill the rights of the individual and the rights of Allah Almighty. Taqwa allows you to attain this. So fasting in the month of Ramadan is a gateway to taqwa. Further to this, it is a gateway to patience, as we alluded to. Imam Ghazali expands upon the narration mentioned in Jami' al-Tirmizi that fasting is one half of patience, like we just alluded to, and identifies that patience is giving preference to pleasing Allah Almighty over choosing the whims of one's own desires, which are spurred by anger and passion, both of which suppressed by hunger. So what is it that allows you to develop sabr, patience? It is suppressing your desires and controlling your whims. And how is that achieved? That is achieved through fasting. That is achieved through fasting. This is why the Prophet ﷺ in a famous narration mentioned in Bukhari, Ya Ma'shar al-Shabab, oh young people, if you are able to marry, you should marry. If you are able to marry, you should marry, meaning what? That if you have the means, the wasail, you shouldn't delay, but you should marry as soon as the opportunity arises. And if you can't marry, in order to control your sexual appetite, one would be required to fast. This is the advice of the Prophet ﷺ. Fasting is something that suppresses the carnal appetite. And of course, it is something which allows patience to develop. Fasting is something which allows patience to develop. And there are three types of fasting. Firstly is practicing patience to fulfill the obligations and to be righteous. So that's something we can all achieve in this month of Ramadan, a month of change. Secondly, abstaining from evil and prohibited acts. Thirdly, practicing patience during times of hardship without complaints. Imam Ibn al-Qayyim is reported to have said this. So fasting is a manifestation of patience. And just on patience, Inna Allah ma'as sabirin. Indeed, Allah Almighty is with those who are patient. Wa bashir sabirin. Glad tidings be upon those who are patient. And patience is at the beginning of the trial and tribulation. Inna ma sabru inda sadmatil ula. Yes, the Prophet ﷺ said, patience is at the beginning of the trial and tribulation. Patience isn't that you express your anger and start throwing things about and smashing a few plates and then you sit down and you say, oh, by the way, I didn't really do anything. I'm just a patient person. That's not patience, that would be foolishness, to be honest. Yes? There's a lengthier background to this narration as well. Number three, we said first and foremost, the inner dimension is that fasting is the gateway to taqwa. Number two, a gateway to patience. Number three here, a gateway to paradise. Brothers and sisters, what an opportunity for you and me in this month of Ramadan to gain our place in paradise. Look at this narration from Sahih Bukhari. The Prophet ﷺ is reported to have said, when a servant of Allah Almighty observes the fast for a day for the sake of Allah, Allah Almighty then distances that person, creates a distance between that person and the fires of Jahannam, the distance of 70 years. SubhanAllah. 70 years is the distance between you and the fire of Jahannam when you keep one fast of Ramadan for the sake of Allah. Not because it's a trend or it's a fashion or you're making a statement or you want to post it on Facebook, I'm fasting, or it's been really hard for me. Keep this between you and Allah. Be sincere in your actions, in your deeds. Fasting is therefore not only the door to worship, but it also acts as a protection from the fires of Jahannam. The Messenger of Allah instructed Sayyidah Aisha, the mother of the believers, radiyallahu ta'ala anha, to persist with knocking on the door of paradise. Sayyidah Aisha asked her, with what shall I knock the door of paradise with? And the Prophet ﷺ replied by saying, with hunger. We're a spoiled generation. Yes, we've got everything at our disposal. If we're hungry at 10 o'clock at night, Uber eats. If we're hungry at 2 o'clock in the morning, just eats. Whatever it may be. But we need to become those people who suppress our whims and our desires and try to exercise hunger. Starve the nafs. If you were to summarize this discussion, starve the nafs. Because the month of Ramadan is an open battlefield between you and your nafs. You can't necessarily blame shaitan, can you? Because he's on a vacation. The Prophet ﷺ, shaitan is chained and shackled in the month of Ramadan. But the effects of shaitan are still evident. Because he's been working on us for the 11 months leading up to Ramadan, from last Ramadan. So it's an open battlefield between you and your nafs. Why is it that some people, first couple of days, they are rejuvenated, energized, they're on it, like a car bonnet. And then after a few days, after the first week, they're why? Because we've not disciplined ourselves. You find that the masajid are busy in the first few nights of Ramadan. But then that middle period, it goes empty and quiet again. And then towards the end, because we know it's Laylatul Qadr and Khatm Quran, then we make the effort to attend again. This is a reflection of the state of our Iman. This is why steadfastness is greater than a miracle. Al-istiqamatu fawqa al-karam. Steadfastness is greater than a miracle. So the month of Ramadan is the month where we attain our place in paradise. And of course, Jannah has 7 gates, according to one narration. And one of the gates of Jannah is Ar-Rayyan. Only the one who observes the fast of Ramadan will be allowed to enter this gate of paradise. And whoever enters this gate of paradise will never be thirsty again. I have 3 minutes. Ramadan is the month of the Ummah. It is the month of mercy. It is the month of forgiveness. As we mentioned, it is the month of patience. Further to this, it is the month of salvation. So many people from amongst our family members and friends who were with us this time last year, who are no longer with us again, and won't have the opportunity to observe the month of Ramadan. So blessed and fortunate are you and me to be on the eve of Ramadan. Even then there's no guarantee that we'll actually reach the month. Allahumma ballighna Ramadan. Oh Allah, allow us to reach the month of Ramadan. Nobody can guarantee tonight, never mind Ramadan, which is less than 2 weeks away. The first Ashra of Ramadan is where we look to seek the mercy of Allah Almighty Jalla wa'ala. The second Ashra, the second 10 days, is where we seek forgiveness, look for the divine forgiveness from Allah Almighty Jalla wa'ala. And the third Ashra is where we look to seek freedom, emancipation from the fires of Jahannam. And of course, Ramadan is the month of the Quran, is the month of charity, is the month of solidarity. This year more so than previous years, we need to show solidarity with the Palestinians. I don't want to go down that dimensional route as well. But if we are celebrating the festivities of Ramadan and preparing for the festivities of Eid, whilst the Muslims of Gaza and Palestine and Syria and Yemen and Sudan and Uyghur Muslims in China, and the list goes on, if they're suffering, then doesn't that make us hypocrites? Correct me if I'm wrong. Hypocrisy of the highest level. Or are we just Muslims when we protest on the streets? Or when we feel good by boycotting Starbucks and McDonald's? We need to be sincere in our deen, we need to be sincere in our religion, and we need to show solidarity to the Palestinians, especially in this month of Ramadan. We've already alluded to how Ramadan is the month of the Quran, which is exactly 2 o'clock. I'm not going to say too much now. شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن. Read as much of the Quran as you can in this month of Ramadan. Make it your target, 1 para a day, 30 para in the month, 1 full Quran that you look to finish. Read this Quran again for the Palestinians who have been martyred in this genocide and brutality that's happening against them. But nevertheless, I want everyone to read the second bullet point here, which summarizes the last 15-20 minutes. Read the second bullet. Eyes, are you reading? And did you know that Ramadan is not just the month of the Quran, but it's also the month where the Sahifas were revealed to Ibrahim alayhi salam, the Torah was revealed to Musa alayhi salam, and the Injil was revealed to Isa alayhi salam. Allah Akbar. In a narration mentioned Muslim of Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal. Again, I'm not talking as much as I want to now, but you can quickly read through these prophetic recommendations. And finally, very beautiful, and every narration is beautiful, but this is a prelude to the importance of Ramadan. You may have heard this narration before. The Prophet ﷺ said to the companions, be present at the pulpit. So the companions presented themselves at the pulpit, the member of the Prophet ﷺ. ما بين بيتي ومنبري روضة من رياض الجنة. The Prophet ﷺ said that area, that place from my house to my pulpit is a garden from the gardens of Jannah, Riyadh al-Jannah. So the Sahaba gathered there. So the Prophet ﷺ, when climbing the first step of the minbar, he said Ameen. And then when he climbed the second step, he said Ameen. And then the third step, he repeated again and said Ameen. The Sahaba said, Ya Rasulullah, we saw something and we heard from you something that we had never heard before. And nobody was making dua, but you were saying Ameen. And we saw that you were climbing every step of the minbar and saying Ameen. What's the reason? Second part. So the Prophet ﷺ replied by saying that indeed Jibreel visited me. And Jibreel said, far from mercy is he who attains Ramadan and is not forgiven. This was the dua of who? Jibreel alayhi salam. And who said Ameen to this dua? The Prophet ﷺ. So far is that individual from the mercy of Allah who enters into the month of Ramadan but does not attain forgiveness from Allah. The second dua was what? That far is he from the mercy of Allah Almighty who, when the Prophet ﷺ is mentioned, does not send blessings upon the Prophet ﷺ. All you have to say is Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Again, we find people who become statues. When the name of the Prophet, some people are allergic, like I've already alluded to, yes? Social media full of these individuals. Oh, you praise the Prophet ﷺ too much. You remember the Prophet ﷺ too much. If it wasn't for the Prophet ﷺ, we wouldn't have fasting in Ramadan. Who would have told us about fasting in Ramadan? If it wasn't for the Prophet ﷺ, we wouldn't have the Quran. If it wasn't for the Prophet ﷺ, we wouldn't have the 5 daily prayers. We don't say he's God. We don't say he's the Son of God. But without doubt, he's the mercy sent to the whole of mankind. Rahmatan lil alameen. Without doubt, he's the seal of the prophets. Khatamun Nabiyyin. And without doubt, he is the reason for our existence. वो जो न थे तो कुछ न था, वो जो न हो तो कुछ न हो. Jaan hai wo jahan ki, jaan hai to jahan hai. So people who don't understand the basics of the deen and throwing around accusations that you're a mushrik and you're a muqtadi and you're this and you're that. If you ask them what's the definition of shirk and bid'ah, they wouldn't even know the first element of the discussion. So we love the Prophet ﷺ, we don't worship him. We honor the Prophet ﷺ, we don't worship him. Misconceptions that often need to be dispelled and clarified. And then the third dua, my last words, also worth listening to and understanding. The third dua was what? That far is he from the mercy of Allah Almighty who finds one or both of his parents attaining old age with him or her, yet both do not enter him into heaven. So your parents are either your key to Jannah or your path to Jahannam. And in a day and age where, unfortunately, children are not understanding the value and worth of their parents. Correct me if I'm wrong, you hear of Muslim youngsters placing their parents into retirement homes. Muslim youngsters placing their parents should say to care homes. Why? What you say? Astaghfirullah. That father, that mother who nurtured 7, 8, 9 children, now one child, 2 children, they can look after that one mother, one father. It's not my responsibility, it's your responsibility. And now this growing trend. When the parents are alive, nobody asks, how are you doing? Do you need anything? We push up our rating. And when they die, we exploit their death by putting it up on Facebook and social media and WhatsApp. Understand and appreciate the maqam and the status of your mother and father. And birrul walidain, be dutiful toward them. Anyway, sufficient is what we have gone through. Considering it was a 1-hour session, we started at 1:15. We managed to, alhamdulillah, go through the 17 slides that I had prepared for today's session. I hope and pray that you found it beneficial. Forgive me for being abrupt in certain aspects of the discussion. It's just the way I am. It's a DNA thing more than anything. Nevertheless, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. If not, we will conclude with a short dua, and then we're all free to leave. No questions? Rifka, do you have any questions? What's your question? You don't know? اللهم صل على سيدنا ومولانا محمد كما تحب وترضى وأنت صل عليه ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار ربنا أتمم لنا نورنا واغفر لنا إنك على كل شيء قدير اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا ما ينفعنا وزدنا علما وزدنا حكمة والحمد لله على كل حال يا الله يا رحمن يا رحيم. Accept this gathering of knowledge in your heart. The good that we have mentioned, accept it from us. Any wrong that we may have said, slip of the tongue, forgive us. Shower your mercies, blessing, khas, karma, rahmat upon each and every one of us. In particular, Hassanuddin, Ya Allah, who's organized this gathering, this session here at the university. Ya Allah, bless him and all those who supported him. His uncle, Maulana Shamsuddin, we make dua for him, grant them istiqamat upon their services to the deen. The sisters were here, and those who will watch this program afterwards on YouTube, Ya Allah, we make dua for each and every person. If they are in a state of difficulty and hardship, remove their difficulties and hardships for them. Grant the students here success in their studies at this university, success in the exams of this world and the exams of the next world. Ya Allah, allow us to benefit from the month of Ramadan. Allow us to attain forgiveness through the month of Ramadan. Allow us to worship you as you should be worshipped, and to read as much of the Quran as we can in the month of Ramadan. Sallallahu ala habibi Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in bi rahmatika ya